we welcome Hazel Trice Edney, the editor and publisher of the Trice Edney Newswire, Stacy Brown, the senior correspondent for the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and of course, we are very pleased to have Misha Green, the Washington, D.C. editor of the Afro, one of the oldest African-American newspapers in the United States. We're so pleased to have you. But I want to ask you first, Hazel, from your perspective, what is the most critical issue facing not only Black America, but all Americans as we are now in 2021?
Oh, absolutely. Before us all and on all of our minds, whether Black or white or all of Americans, we're thinking about that coronavirus. We are praying for a fix to this thing. And but particularly from a Black perspective, from which I write, we are deeply concerned about the fact that Black people are 4 times more likely to get the virus and 3 times more likely to die from it.
Those statistics, they're critical. But also you know that even though we now have a vaccine for COVID-19, there's a latent fear among Blacks, Latinos, people of color, even all of whether or not they should take the vaccine.
For good reason, there's fear because of what's happened to Black people in the past. All you got to do is just read your history. The first thing that comes to mind is the Tuskegee experiment. That's one of the first things that people think about, how we were just left alone to die. They didn't shoot it up into us, but they left the men alone to just see what was going to happen to them. And so there is reason to fear. However, there's a way to get around all of that now. Since we know what could happen, there are ways to prevent it, to make sure that there are African Americans that we trust at the table.
Stacy, as a senior correspondent of the NNPA, what are you hearing from publishers all across the United States about the readiness or the hesitation to take this vaccine?
Our publishers, there's over 230 of them. They are as concerned as what Hazel was talking about. One of the members of that is Dr. James Hildreth, who is the president of Meharry Medical College. I was talking to Dr. Hildreth recently, and here's the good news. Now, of course, he's an African-American doctor.
One of the leading
infectious
disease experts in America. The CDC uses him, and the Department of Health and Human Services also.
And he's also been appointed to the board at the FDA, which has to approve the vaccine. And he told me there's no way he's going to approve a vaccine unless there's enough African-American representation. And he said he'll be the first to take that vaccine.
Now, I talked about how old the Afro, but you're a very young sister. How do you feel about the vaccine?
I love that I get to be the millennial and younger voice to such an established and respected organization like the Afro, 128 years later. But the great thing about the Afro is that we have an archives, right? And we've looked at what people were talking about during the pandemic of 1920, right, with Spanish flu, and what people were talking about in 1920, right, and in the late 19-teens. And people had the same exact concerns. No one was wearing their masks. Will there be a vaccine? And so looking now at millennials today and even a younger generation, Zers, the same concerns still exist. And I almost think at a very heightened level because millennials and Generation Zers do their reading. They know about Tuskegee. They know about the risks that other vaccines have. And so I think in sort of that history and research that millennials are doing, there's a lot of fear-mongering as well. And so what my goal and responsibility has been as a millennial editor is to try to get the information out as much as possible. Definitely talk about the concerns because I think the concerns are real and valid. But I have a lot of people who I know personally who don't believe in vaccinations at all. And that is a concern. As Dr. Chavis said, I mean, we're going to a place in which the flu vaccination is going to be just as key as the the coronavirus vaccination. We're recently talking about shingles. I just read an article about Black women being most affected by shingles because of stress and things like that. So those are all vaccinations that we need to start talking about further. And I think that millennials, with really good research and good, strong, valuable information, particularly from trusted sources like the Black press, they'll go ahead and take the vaccine. They just have to feel comfortable.